Jake Morrison stared at the warning lights flashing across his control panel. Red indicators blinked faster and faster as his ship shook violently. The meteor storm had come out of nowhere, tearing through space like bullets through paper. His shields were failing, dropping percentage by percentage on the screen in front of him. He gripped the controls tight and tried to steer away from the rocks flying past his windows. Each impact against the hull made a terrible sound, metal screaming as it bent and broke. The computer voice kept repeating the same message over and over. Hull breach in sections 4 and 7. Life support critical. Emergency landing required. Jake had been a survey pilot for 8 years. He had seen dangerous situations before, survived close calls that would have killed less experienced pilots. But this was different. This was bad. The nearest rescue station was 3 weeks away, and his communication system had just gone offline. The ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel with a jolt that threw Jake against his safety harness. Below him, a planet appeared, covered in green forests and blue oceans. The computer identified it as an unexplored world in the Kepler 442 system. No human had ever set foot there. No human had ever even studied it properly. Jake had no choice. He aimed for a flat area near a forest and hoped for the best. The ship fell through the atmosphere, heating up until the windows glowed orange. Trees rushed up to meet him, getting bigger and bigger in his view. He pulled up hard on the controls, trying to slow down, trying to make the landing something he could survive. The impact was brutal. The ship hit the ground and bounced, then hit again and kept going, plowing through dirt and plants and rocks. Jake's head snapped forward and back, his body thrown around like a toy despite the harness holding him in his seat. Metal tore, glass shattered. Systems exploded in showers of sparks. Then everything stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. Jake sat still for a moment, checking himself for injuries. His left leg hurt bad, probably sprained or broken. His ribs ached with each breath. Blood ran down from a cut on his forehead. But he was alive. He unbuckled the harness with shaking hands and looked around the ruined cockpit. Smoke filled the air, making him cough. Fires burned in the back sections. The emergency systems kicked in, spraying foam to put out the flames. Jake grabbed his survival pack from the locker beside his seat and limped toward the exit hatch. The planet's air hit him as the hatch opened. It was breathable, thank God. Warm and humid, filled with strange smells he didn't recognize. His scanner confirmed what the initial readings had shown. Oxygen levels good. No toxic chemicals. Temperature comfortable. He could survive here, at least for a while. Jake climbed down from the wreck and looked at what was left of his ship. The stellar wanderer had carried him across half the galaxy. Now, it was just twisted metal and broken dreams. The entire rear section had been torn off. The engines were completely destroyed. The communication array was gone. His emergency beacon was damaged but still working, sending out a weak signal that might reach someone eventually. He tested his weight on his injured leg and winced. Definitely sprained. Maybe worse. He would need shelter soon. The sun was already low in the sky, and he had no idea what kinds of creatures lived in these forests. Predators on most planets hunted at night. Jake started walking, following a stream he could hear nearby. Water meant life, and life meant he could find food and materials to build a shelter. Each step sent pain shooting through his leg, but he kept moving. Stopping meant giving up, and he wasn't ready to do that yet. That's when he heard it, a soft sound, almost like crying, high-pitched and scared. Jake stopped and listened hard, trying to figure out where it was coming from. There it was again, coming from somewhere ahead and to his left. He pushed through some bushes and found a fallen tree, huge and old, its roots torn up from the ground. The crying sounds came from underneath it. Jake knelt down carefully, his leg protesting, and looked into the dark space under the roots. 4 pairs of eyes stared back at him. They were small creatures, covered in fur, huddled together in a pile. They looked scared, and cold. As Jake's eyes adjusted to the darkness, he could see them better. They were about the size of cats, with round faces and small paws. Their fur was dirty and matted. One of them, the biggest, had a white patch on its chest. Jake pulled out his scanner and pointed it at them. The device hummed and displayed information. Juvenile life forms, mammalian, warm-blooded, social species, based on huddling behavior, approximate age 3 to 4 months. The scanner also detected 2 larger bodies nearby, adult members of the same species. Both dead, Jake understood immediately. The meteor storm that had destroyed his ship had killed the parents of these little ones. They were orphans now, just like he was an orphan on this strange planet. All alone with no one to help them. He knew the rules. Starfleet had clear regulations about interfering with native species. Don't touch them. Don't feed them. Don't change their natural development. Let nature take its course, no matter how harsh that course might be. But Jake also knew what it felt like to be alone and afraid. He remembered being a child, losing his father in a transport accident, feeling like the whole universe had turned cold and dark. These little creatures had just lost everything. They were cold and hungry and scared, and night was coming. The biggest one, the female with the white patch, looked right at him. Her eyes were bright gold, almost glowing in the shadows. She didn't run away or try to hide. She just looked at him like she was asking a question, like she was asking if he would help or if he would leave them to die. Jake made his decision. He reached into the space under the tree, moving slow and gentle. The cubs made nervous sounds but didn't run. He wrapped his jacket around them, gathering all 4 into the warm fabric. They were so light, barely weighing anything in his arms. They trembled against his chest, their small hearts beating fast. "It's okay," he said quietly. He carried them away from the fallen tree, away from the bodies of their parents, looking for a safe place to spend the night. The cubs pressed close to each other, inside his jacket, making soft sounds. Jake felt them relax slightly as they absorbed his body heat. The sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in colors he had never seen before. Purple and orange and deep red, beautiful and alien. Jake found a cave entrance in a rocky hillside and checked it carefully for danger. Empty, dry, perfect. He set the cubs down inside and started making preparations for the night. This wasn't how he had planned his mission to end. Stranded on an unknown planet, with 4 alien creatures depending on him for survival. But somehow, as he worked in the fading light, he didn't feel as alone as he had in that crashed ship. The cubs watched everything he did with curious eyes. And Jake knew, deep in his heart, that his life had just changed forever. Jake worked quickly as darkness fell across the planet. He pulled equipment from his survival pack and spread it across the cave floor. A portable heater that ran on a small power cell, protein bars and water purification tablets. A medical kit. A thermal blanket made of special material that reflected body heat. Basic tools for starting fires and building shelter. The cubs stayed in the corner, pressed together in a furry pile. They watched Jake, with those gold eyes, tracking his every movement. Sometimes one would make a small chirping sound, and the others would answer. Jake wondered what they were saying to each other. Were they scared? Did they understand their parents were gone? He got the heater running and set it in the middle of the cave. Warm air began to flow, pushing back the cold that was creeping in from outside. Jake sat down near the heater and opened a protein bar. His stomach growled. He hadn't eaten since breakfast, and that felt like a lifetime ago. The cubs' noses twitched as they smelled the food. The smallest one crept forward a few inches, then stopped. The cub looked at it, then at him, then back at the food. It didn't come closer. Not hungry? Jake ate the piece himself. Fair enough. You probably need something different anyway. He checked his scanner for information about the local wildlife. The device showed several small animals in the area, things that looked like rodents or birds. The cubs' species were likely hunters, based on their teeth and claws. They would need fresh meat, not human food. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Right now, they all needed sleep. Jake pulled out the thermal blanket and spread it on the ground near the heater. The material shimmered in the dim light, designed to trap warmth and reflect it back. It could keep a person alive in freezing temperatures. He looked at the cubs. They were shivering despite the heater. Their fur was still damp from being outside, and they were too young to regulate their body temperature properly. Jake knew what he needed to do, but he wasn't sure how they would react. "Okay, little ones," he said softly. "Let's get you warm." Jake moved toward them slowly, keeping his hands visible and his voice calm. The white-patched female made a low, growling sound, warning him to stay back. The others huddled behind her, using her as a shield. She was the leader, Jake realized. The one who would decide if he was a threat or a friend. He stopped moving and sat down, making himself smaller and less threatening. He just waited, letting them get used to his presence. Minutes passed. The cave grew darker as the last light faded from the sky outside. Strange sounds echoed through the forest. Animal calls that Jake couldn't identify. Some sounded close. Some sounded big. The white-patched cub tilted her head, studying him. Then she did something unexpected. She took one step forward. Just one. But it was enough. Jake stayed perfectly still. She took another step, and another, until she was close enough to sniff his hand. Her nose was cold and wet against his skin. She smelled him carefully, taking in his scent. Jake barely breathed, afraid of scaring her away. After what felt like forever, she made a soft, chirping sound. The other cubs looked up, surprised. Then they started moving toward Jake too, following their leader. Within minutes, all 4 cubs were around him, sniffing and chirping and bumping their heads against his hands. Jake laughed quietly, relief flooding through him. They had accepted him. He gently scooped them up, one by one, and carried them to the thermal blanket. He arranged them in a row and tucked the blanket around their small bodies, making sure each one was covered. The material wrapped around them like a cocoon, immediately trapping their body heat. The cubs made happy sounds, snuggling into the warmth. "There you go," Jake said. "Sleep tight." He turned away to check his equipment. The emergency beacon was still broadcasting, but weakly. He would need to boost its signal somehow, maybe salvage parts from the crashed ship. That meant a long walk tomorrow, on his injured leg. He grimaced at the thought. A rustling sound made him turn back. The cubs had wriggled out of the blanket. All 4 of them. They were sitting in a line between Jake and the cave entrance, their small bodies alert and their ears pointed forward. They were staring out into the darkness beyond the cave. "What are you doing?" Jake asked. "You need to sleep." The white-patched cub looked back at him and chirped once. Then she turned her attention back to the cave entrance. The others did the same. They weren't moving. They weren't playing. They were watching, guarding. Jake felt something strange in his chest. A tightness that made it hard to swallow. These little creatures, who had just lost everything, who were cold and scared and hurt. They were trying to protect him. They were keeping watch so he could rest safely. "You don't have to do that," he said, his voice rough. "I'm bigger than you. I should be the one watching." But the cubs didn't move. They stayed at their posts, 4 tiny guards standing between their human and whatever might come from the dark forest. The white-patched one made a low sound, almost like she was saying no. "We will watch. You saved us. Now we save you." Jake didn't argue anymore. He settled back against the cave wall, pulling his jacket tight against the cold. His leg throbbed with pain. His whole body ached from the crash. He was exhausted and hurt and stranded on an alien world with no guarantee of rescue. But he wasn't alone. 4 small lives depended on him now, and somehow, he depended on them too. They had formed a bond in the space of a few hours, something deeper than words or species. They understood loss. They understood fear. And they understood that sometimes, the only way to survive was to take care of each other. Jake's eyes grew heavy. He fought against sleep, wanting to stay alert for danger. But his body had other ideas. The warmth from the heater, the quiet sounds of the cubs breathing, the exhaustion from the terrible day. It all pulled him down toward unconsciousness. The last thing he saw before sleep took him was the cubs, still at their posts. The white-patched one turned her head slightly, checking on him. When she saw he was resting, she made a soft, satisfied sound. Then, she went back to watching the darkness. Jake dreamed of home, of Earth, with its familiar stars and cities full of light, of his mother's house, where he had grown up, where he had felt safe. But when he woke briefly in the middle of the night, disoriented and scared, he saw the cubs still there, still watching, still protecting him. He closed his eyes again and slept deeply, better than he had in months of lonely travel through space. Because for the first time since his father died, since he started running from his pain by flying through the stars, he felt like he belonged somewhere, like someone cared if he lived or died. Morning came slowly. The planet's sun rose in a different direction than Earth's, painting the sky in shades of green and gold. Jake woke to find the cubs curled around his legs, finally sleeping after their long watch. They looked peaceful, their small chests rising and falling with each breath. He didn't move, didn't want to wake them. Instead, he just sat there, watching them sleep, and thought about what came next. Finding food, building better shelter, fixing the beacon, surviving long enough for rescue to arrive. But also this, keeping these 4 cubs alive, teaching them to hunt and hide and grow strong, making sure their parents' deaths weren't the end of their whole family, being the thing they needed most, a protector in a universe that had shown them nothing but cruelty. The white-patched cub stirred and opened one eye. She saw Jake was awake and made a happy chirping sound. The others woke up immediately, scrambling to their feet and crowding around him. They bumped their heads against his hands, asking for attention, asking for reassurance that he was still there. Jake scratched their ears and rubbed their backs, feeling their warmth and life under his fingers. They chirped in response, and somehow, Jake knew everything was going to be okay. They would figure this out together. The first week on the planet taught Jake more about survival than all his training combined. The cubs learned even faster. They watched everything he did with complete focus, their intelligent eyes missing nothing. When Jake gathered water from the stream, they followed and learned which pools were safe to drink from. When he collected edible plants, they sniffed each one and memorized the scents. Jake gave them names on the 3rd day. The white-patched leader became Luna, because she seemed to glow in the moonlight. The smallest, with dark fur and quick movements, became Scout, because he always ran ahead to check for danger. The one with a brown patch over one eye became Patch, and the reddish female, with the loudest chirp, became Ember. They responded to their names within hours, proving their intelligence. Jake's scanner kept finding new data about them. Their brains were large, for their body size. They showed problem-solving abilities far beyond what he expected. They communicated with each other through a complex system of sounds and body language. But they were still young and still needed care. Finding food for them was Jake's biggest challenge. His protein bars couldn't sustain them. They needed meat, fresh and raw. Jake had never been much of a hunter, but necessity made him learn fast. He fashioned a spear from a straight branch and a sharp piece of metal from the crashed ship. The first 2 days, he caught nothing. The cubs grew restless and hungry, their chirps taking on a desperate tone. Jake felt their hunger like it was his own. He had to succeed. On the 3rd day, Scout found something. The little cub raced back to Jake, chirping excitedly, then ran off again. Jake followed, limping on his injured leg, using the spear as a walking stick. Scout led him to a grove where small animals fed on fallen fruit. They looked like rabbits, but with longer ears and blue-tinted fur. Jake crouched behind a bush, barely breathing. He waited until one of the creatures came close, then threw the spear with all his strength. It flew straight and true, catching the animal through the side. The creature died quickly. Jake felt bad about it, but he also felt relief. The cubs would eat today. He brought the animal back to the cave and used his knife to prepare it. The cubs crowded around, making hungry sounds. Jake gave them the meat raw, which seemed to be what they wanted. They ate eagerly, tearing at the flesh with their small teeth. When they finished, they licked their paws clean and chirped happily at Jake. Luna approached him and rubbed her head against his leg, leaving a smear of blood on his pants. Jake didn't mind. He understood what she was saying. Thank you. You are pack. You are family. From that day on, the cubs helped with hunting. They were natural predators, able to move silently through the forest and track prey by scent. Scout lived up to his name, always finding game first. Patch learned to circle around and drive animals toward Jake's spear. Ember used her loud voice to startle prey into running. Luna coordinated them all, directing their efforts with chirps and body movements. They became a team, a hunting pack. And Jake was part of it. Despite being a different species, despite coming from a different world, they accepted him completely. And he accepted them. But hunting wasn't the only skill they developed. The cubs started bringing things to Jake, testing whether each item was useful. Ember found leaves that Jake's scanner identified as medicinal. When Jake applied them to his injured leg, the pain decreased significantly. Patch discovered a type of vine that was incredibly strong, perfect for making rope. Scout located a grove of trees with nuts that humans could eat. Each discovery made Jake more amazed. The cubs weren't just surviving. They were thinking, planning, helping him in ways that showed real understanding. They knew he was hurt. They knew he needed different food than they did. They knew he struggled with certain tasks. And they tried to solve his problems. One evening, as Jake worked on improving their shelter, Luna disappeared into the forest. She returned an hour later dragging a large piece of fabric in her mouth. Jake recognized it immediately as part of the emergency supplies from his ship. He had left it behind because it was too heavy to carry with his bad leg. Luna had gone back to the crash site, alone and in danger, to get something she thought Jake needed. She dropped it at his feet and looked up at him with those gold eyes, clearly proud of herself. Jake knelt down and hugged her, not caring about protocol or regulations or anything except the fierce love he felt for this brave little creature. "Thank you, Luna," he whispered. "You're amazing." That night, like every night, Jake tucked the cubs into their thermal blanket. He made sure each one was warm and comfortable, scratching their ears and telling them they were good. They purred with contentment, a sound Jake had only recently discovered they could make. Then, as always, Jake turned to work on the emergency beacon. He had been trying to boost its signal for days, scavenging parts and testing different configurations. The work required concentration, and he focused on it completely, forgetting about everything else. A low growl made him look up. All 4 cubs were out of their blanket, positioned between Jake and the cave entrance. Their bodies were tense, their ears flat against their heads. They were staring at something in the darkness outside. Jake grabbed his spear and moved forward slowly. In the dim light from the cave, he could see shapes moving. Large shapes, bigger than the cubs, bigger than Jake. His scanner picked up life signs, predators. 3 of them, circling the cave entrance. They looked like reptiles, with scales that reflected light in strange patterns. Their eyes glowed in the dark, and their teeth were long and sharp. They moved with the confidence of apex predators, creatures at the top of the food chain. They had probably been drawn by the smell of the meat from dinner. Jake's hands tightened on the spear. He had only 5 shots left in his sidearm, and he was saving those for absolute emergencies. He might be able to fight off one of these creatures, but 3? With a bad leg? The odds weren't good. The predators moved closer. One of them made a hissing sound, calling to the others. They were coordinating, planning their attack. Jake stepped forward, putting himself between the cubs and the danger. If these things wanted to hurt his pack, they would have to go through him first. But the cubs had different ideas. Luna darted past Jake, positioning herself in front. Scout, Patch, and Ember followed, forming a line of small, furry defenders. They made sounds Jake had never heard before. Deep, aggressive growls that seemed impossible from creatures so small. "No," Jake said. "Get back. You're too little." Luna looked back at him and chirped sharply. Jake didn't need a translator to understand. "We protect Pack. We protect you. Like you protect us." The largest predator lunged forward, testing their defenses. Ember screamed at it, a sound so loud and shocking that the predator actually stopped. Scout and Patch spread out, making the group look bigger than it was. Luna stood firm, her small body radiating determination. Jake saw what they were doing. They were using pack tactics, the same ones they had developed for hunting. But this time, they were the prey defending against predators, and they refused to back down, refused to abandon Jake even though it might cost them their lives. Something broke inside Jake's chest. These cubs, who he had saved from certain death, were now willing to die for him. They didn't care that he was different. They didn't care that he was supposed to be the strong one. They just cared that he was theirs, and they were his. "Together then," Jake said, moving up to stand beside Luna. "We fight together." The predators saw the strange group standing united and seemed confused. This wasn't normal prey behavior. Prey ran. Prey scattered. It didn't stand and fight back as a coordinated unit. The predators circled, looking for weakness. Finding none, Jake made himself as big as possible, raising the spear and shouting. The cubs joined in, their voices mixing with his, in a chorus of defiance. The sound echoed through the forest, loud and wild and absolutely fearless. The predators hesitated. This was taking too long, requiring too much effort. Easier prey existed elsewhere. The largest one made a snorting sound and turned away. The others followed, disappearing into the night. Jake collapsed against the cave wall, his heart pounding. The cubs immediately surrounded him, checking him for injuries with their noses and paws. When they found none, they chirped with relief and pressed close to him, seeking comfort after the scary encounter. "You crazy little things," Jake said, his voice shaking. Luna looked up at him and made a soft sound. The message was clear. "So could you. That is why we watch. That is why we guard. We are Pack." The storm arrived on the 16th day. Jake woke to a sky that had turned black, clouds rolling in like massive waves across a dark ocean. The wind picked up, bending the trees and making a howling sound that set his teeth on edge. The cubs sensed the danger and huddled close to him, making nervous sounds. Jake checked his weather scanner. The display showed a massive storm system, bigger than anything he had seen on Earth. Lightning flashed in the distance, bright enough to light up the whole forest. Thunder followed seconds later, so loud it shook dust from the cave ceiling. "It's okay," Jake told the cubs, though he wasn't sure it was. "We're safe in here." The first drops of rain fell like bullets, hard and fast. Within minutes, it became a downpour. Water poured down the hillside, turning the ground to mud. The stream Jake had been using for water swelled to twice its normal size, rushing past with frightening speed. Lightning struck a tree near the cave, splitting it down the middle with a crack like a gunshot. The cubs jumped, pressing even closer to Jake. He wrapped his arms around them, feeling them tremble. Luna made a low whimpering sound, and the others answered with similar noises. They were scared. and Jake couldn't blame them. The storm raged for hours. Jake kept the cubs calm by talking to them, telling them stories about Earth, about cities with buildings that touch the sky, about oceans bigger than continents. He didn't know if they understood his words, but his voice seemed to comfort them. They slowly relaxed, though they never stopped pressing against him. Then, the cave started leaking. Water dripped from cracks in the ceiling, slowly, at first, then faster. Puddles formed on the ground. Jake moved their supplies to higher ground and tried to plug the worst leaks with cloth. But there were too many. The cave floor became a shallow pool. The portable heater sparked and died, killed by the water. Jake cursed and tried to restart it, but it was broken. The temperature in the cave dropped quickly. The cubs started shivering despite their fur. Jake pulled out the thermal blanket and wrapped it around all of them, but it wasn't enough. They needed the heater. Night fell, and the storm showed no signs of stopping. Jake held the cubs close, sharing his body heat. He was cold, too. His clothes soaked through, but he couldn't let them know he was scared. They needed him to be strong. Luna crawled up onto his lap, looking at him with worried eyes. She touched her nose to his face, checking on him. Jake scratched behind her ears and forced a smile. "I'm fine, girl. We'll get through this," but he wasn't sure they would. The cave was flooding. The heater was broken. Their food supplies were running low. And the storm just kept coming. Wave after wave of rain and wind and lightning. Jake's emergency beacon had gone completely dark, killed by water damage. Even if rescue came now, they wouldn't be able to find him. The second day of the storm was worse. The water in the cave rose to ankle depth. Jake had to move everything to a natural shelf in the rock. A narrow ledge barely big enough for him and the cubs. They huddled there, cold and wet and miserable, watching the storm destroy everything. Jake's leg, which had been healing, started hurting again. The constant dampness made it swell. He tried not to let the cubs see him wince with each movement. But Luna noticed. She always noticed. She pressed against his injured leg, trying to warm it with her body. By the third day, Jake was feverish. The infection in his leg had returned, worse than before. He felt hot and cold at the same time, his thoughts fuzzy and confused. The cubs stayed pressed against him constantly now, their small bodies the only warmth he had. Scout brought him water to drink, carrying it in his mouth from a clean pool he had found. Patch and Ember took turns grooming Jake's hair, a comforting gesture that made him feel cared for. Luna lay across his chest, her steady breathing and heartbeat a reminder that he wasn't alone. Jake drifted in and out of consciousness. Sometimes he thought he was back on his ship, flying through space. Sometimes he thought he was home with his mother. But always, when he woke, the cubs were there, watching, waiting, keeping him warm. On the fourth day, the storm finally broke. The rain stopped, the clouds parted, and sunlight streamed into the cave. Jake opened his eyes to find the cubs staring at him intently. When they saw he was awake, they chirped with joy and licked his face. Jake sat up slowly, his whole body aching. He checked his scanner and found it barely functional. The screen cracked and flickering, but they were alive, all of them. They had survived. "We need to move," Jake said, his voice rough. "We need to go back to the ship. I have to fix the beacon." The cubs chirped in agreement. They seemed to understand the urgency. Jake gathered what supplies he could salvage, putting them in his waterproof pack. He tested his leg and nearly fell. The infection had spread. His whole leg was swollen and hot to the touch. Luna made a worried sound and pressed against his good side, supporting him. The other cubs took positions around him, ready to help. Jake took a deep breath and started walking. Each step was agony, but he kept moving. The ship was 2 miles away. Maybe more. In his condition, it would take all day. The cubs adapted to his slow pace without complaint. Scout ran ahead, finding the easiest path through the storm-damaged forest. Patch and Ember stayed close, steadying Jake when he stumbled. Luna walked beside him, her presence a constant source of strength. They moved through a changed landscape. The storm had knocked down trees and created new streams where none existed before. Jake's landmarks were gone, making navigation difficult. He relied on his damaged scanner, praying it wouldn't fail completely. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, then started to fall again. Jake's fever got worse. He saw things that weren't there, heard voices in the wind. But every time he started to fall, the cubs were there, pushing against him, keeping him upright, keeping him moving. Ember found fruit and brought it to him. Jake ate without tasting it, needing the energy. Patch discovered a plant with water trapped in its leaves and showed Jake how to drink from it. Scout found a fallen log that made a bridge over a flooded ravine they couldn't cross otherwise. They were thinking, problem-solving, saving his life in 100 small ways. Jake felt pride mixed with his pain. These cubs had learned so much, had become so capable, they were going to survive, with or without him. That thought should have been comforting. But instead, it made him sad. As the sun touched the horizon, Scout came racing back, chirping excitedly. He had found the ship. Jake pushed himself harder, ignoring the pain, ignoring the fever. Just a little further. Just a little more. The stellar wanderer looked worse than Jake remembered. The storm had buried it halfway in mud. Metal panels had been torn off, but it was still there. And somewhere inside it were the parts he needed to fix the beacon. Jake collapsed beside the ship, his strength gone. The cubs gathered around him, making distressed sounds. He wanted to comfort them, but he couldn't find the words. Everything hurt. Everything felt heavy and distant. Luna crawled onto his chest and touched her nose to his. Her gold eyes looked right into his, full of determination and something else. Something that looked like a command. Get up. Keep fighting. We need you. Jake found strength he didn't know he had. He pulled himself up and began searching through the wreckage. His hands shook as he pulled out parts and tools. The cubs helped, carrying smaller pieces, moving debris out of his way. The sun set, but Jake kept working. He used a small flashlight from his pack, its beam cutting through the darkness. His fever made everything feel like a dream. But he forced himself to focus. Connect this wire. Tighten that bolt. Bypass the damaged circuit. The beacon suddenly lit up, its display showing green. Jake checked the signal strength. Good. Better than good. The boost he had added made it 10 times stronger. Any ship within 20 light years would detect it. He activated the beacon and sent out an emergency signal. Then he collapsed, his work finally done. The cubs immediately surrounded him, pressing close, sharing their warmth. Jake wrapped his arms around them and closed his eyes. Good job, he whispered. We did it. The last thing he heard before darkness took him was a new sound. Not thunder, not wind. Something else. Something mechanical and distant. Getting closer. But Jake was too tired to care. He let himself fall into sleep, trusting the cubs to keep watch one more time. Jake woke to bright lights and voices. Human voices. He tried to sit up, but gentle hands pushed him back down. A woman's face appeared above him, wearing the uniform of a medical officer. Her scanner hummed as it passed over his body. Easy, Commander Morrison, she said. You're on the frontier's edge. We picked up your emergency beacon. Jake's mind struggled to process her words. Rescue. He had been rescued. His body felt strange, light and floating. They must have given him medicine for the fever. His leg didn't hurt anymore. The cubs, he said urgently. Where are the cubs? A mine. 1-2 ass. The medical officer smiled. The 4 little aliens, they're fine. They wouldn't leave your side, so we brought them aboard with you. They're in the next room, being examined by our science team. Jake tried to sit up again, and this time the medical officer let him. He was in the ship's medical bay. lying on a clean bed, with machines monitoring his vital signs. Through a window, he could see into another room where the cubs were surrounded by people in science uniforms. Luna saw him and made a loud chirping sound. The other cubs looked up immediately and began running toward the window, trying to reach Jake. The scientists stepped back, surprised by the sudden movement. "Let them in," Jake said. "Please." The medical officer looked uncertain but nodded. She opened the connecting door. All 4 cubs raced through and jumped onto Jake's bed. Crawling all over him and chirping excitedly, they checked him with their noses and paws, making sure he was really okay. Luna pressed her forehead against his, making a purring sound. "I'm okay," Jake told them. "We made it. We're safe." A tall woman in a captain's uniform entered the medical bay. She had gray hair, pulled back in a tight bun, and sharp eyes that missed nothing. Her nameplate read, "Captain Helen Martinez." "Commander Morrison," she said. "I'm glad to see you're awake. We were worried about you. That infection was serious." "How long was I out?" 3 days. "We've been treating you with antibiotics and healing accelerators. Your leg should be fully healed in another week." Helen looked at the cubs, who had arranged themselves protectively around Jake. "Your companions caused quite a stir when we tried to separate them from you. One of my science officers has a claw mark on his arm." Jake winced. "I'm sorry. They're very protective. So I noticed." Helen pulled up a chair and sat down. "I need to hear everything, Commander. From the beginning. How did you end up stranded here with 4 juvenile aliens?" Jake told her the whole story. The meteor storm, the crash, finding the orphaned cubs, the decision to care for them instead of leaving them to die. He talked about the weeks of survival, the hunting, the way the cubs had learned and adapted. He talked about how they kept watch every night, how they had protected him from predators, how they had literally saved his life during the storm. Helen listened without interrupting. When Jake finished, she was quiet for a long time. The cubs had fallen asleep on the bed, exhausted from their excitement. Luna's head rested on Jake's lap, her body warm and solid. "You violated first contact protocols," Helen finally said. "You interfered with a native species. You changed their natural development. By all regulations, you should face a disciplinary hearing." Jake nodded. "I know. I accept the consequences. But I won't apologize for saving them. They were going to die. I couldn't let that happen. I'm not asking you to apologize." Helen leaned forward. "I'm asking you what you want to do now. These cubs are bonded to you. Our scientists say separating them would cause severe psychological trauma. They think of you as their parent, their pack leader. But they're also an uncontacted alien species. We have laws about this." "What kind of laws?" "The Preservation Act. It states that endangered indigenous life forms can be relocated and protected if their survival is threatened. Your cubs have no surviving family group. Their parents are dead. Without intervention, they would likely die within days." Helen pulled up a tablet and showed Jake some data. "Our scans of the planet show only a few hundred members of this species left. They're being hunted to near extinction by those reptilian predators you encountered." Jake felt his heart clench. "So the cubs' whole species is dying?" "Yes, which means, technically, they qualify for protection under the Preservation Act. If someone were to propose a conservation program, one that studied the species and eventually worked to restore their population, the Science Council would likely approve it." Jake looked down at Luna, at her peaceful sleeping face. An idea began forming in his mind. What if the cubs could be ambassadors? Living proof that the species is worth saving? We could study them, learn about their intelligence and social structure, then use that information to help the rest of their kind. Helen smiled. "That's exactly what I was thinking. But such a program would need someone to run it. Someone who understands the species. Someone they trust." "I'll do it," Jake said immediately. "I'll take responsibility for them. I'll document everything. Work with the scientists. Do whatever is needed to help save their species. It won't be easy. You'll have to appear before the Science Council. I don't care. These cubs saved my life more than I saved theirs. I owe them everything. Helen stood up and offered her hand. Jake shook it. Then welcome to the conservation business, Commander. I'll send my full support to the Council. In the meantime, you and your cubs are guests on my ship. We're 3 weeks from Earth. Use that time to write your proposal. Over the next 3 weeks. Jake did exactly that. He spent hours documenting everything he had learned about the cubs, their hunting strategies, their communication methods, their problem-solving abilities. He worked with the science team, running tests that showed the cubs' intelligence was comparable to dolphins or great apes from Earth. The cubs adapted to ship life remarkably well. They learned to navigate the corridors without getting lost. They recognized different crew members and responded to basic commands. Scout discovered he loved the observation deck, where he could watch the stars. Patch became fascinated with the engine room and its complex machinery. Ember made friends with the cook, who gave her treats. Luna stayed closest to Jake, but even she began exploring and learning. The crew fell in love with them. Hardened soldiers and scientists would stop in the corridors to play with the cubs or scratch their ears. Stories spread through the ship about their intelligence and loyalty. By the time the Frontier's Edge reached Earth's orbit, the cubs had become celebrities. Jake's report was ready. He had compiled hundreds of pages of observations, videos, and scientific data. He had letters of support from Captain Helen and every science officer on the ship. He had a detailed plan for how to study the cubs and use what they learned to save the species on their home planet. The night before they docked at Earth Station, Jake couldn't sleep. He sat in his quarters with the cubs arranged around him, thinking about everything that had happened. A month ago, he had been alone, flying through space with nothing but his ship and his memories. Now, he had a family. 4 small lives that depended on him and made him want to be better. Luna crawled onto his lap and looked up at him. Her gold eyes seemed to ask a question. What happens now? Tomorrow we go to Earth, Jake told her. We're going to fight for your species. We're going to make sure your kind doesn't disappear from the galaxy. And no matter what anyone says, you're staying with me. You're mine. And I'm yours. That's forever. Luna made her purring sound and pressed her forehead against his chest. The other cubs moved closer, creating a warm pile of fur and trust. And for the first time since their first night together, they didn't take up guard positions. They just slept. All of them together, safe in the knowledge that they had found their place in the universe. The Science Council hearing took place in a large chamber deep inside Earth Station. Jake stood before a panel of 12 scientists and administrators, the cubs sitting calmly beside him. He had dressed them in small vests marked with identification tags, making them look official and important. Jake presented his case with passion and precision. He showed videos of the cubs hunting, solving problems, protecting him from predators. He presented data about their intelligence, their social bonds, their capacity for learning. He talked about the dying population on their home planet and the urgent need for intervention. The council asked hard questions. Why should they make an exception to the non-interference policy? How could Jake guarantee the cubs wouldn't be harmed by human contact? What made him think he was qualified to lead such a program? Jake answered each question honestly. He talked about the moral responsibility to protect endangered species. He showed medical records proving the cubs were healthy and thriving. He pointed to his years of experience as a survey pilot and his personal bond with the cubs as evidence of his qualifications. But the best argument came from the cubs themselves. During the hearing, one of the council members accidentally knocked a stylus off the table. Before anyone could react, Scout jumped down, grabbed the stylus in his mouth, and brought it back to the council member. Then he sat politely, waiting for acknowledgement. The council chamber fell silent. The member who received the stylus looked shocked, then amazed. Did that creature just understand what I needed and act to help me? Yes, Jake said simply. That's what they do. They observe, they learn, and they help. It's not just instinct. It's intelligence. It's compassion. And it's exactly what we'll lose if we let their species go extinct. The council deliberated for 2 hours. Jake waited outside with the cubs, his stomach twisted with worry. Luna sensed his stress and pressed against his leg, offering comfort. The others gathered close, their presence a reminder that whatever happened, they faced it together. Finally, the doors opened. The head of the council, an elderly woman named Dr. Patricia Cole, stepped out. Her face was serious, giving nothing away. "Commander Morrison," she said, "the council has reached a decision." Jake held his breath. "Your proposal is approved. You are hereby authorized to establish a conservation program for species designation KP442F, commonly referred to as custodians. You will have full funding, staff support, and the authority to return to the home planet for population studies and protection efforts. The 4 juveniles in your care will serve as ambassadors for their species." Jake felt his knees go weak with relief. "Thank you. I won't let you down." "Doctor," Cole's serious expression broke into a smile. "See that you don't. Those little ones are special. The whole galaxy should know about them." She knelt down and held out her hand to Luna. The cub sniffed it carefully, then chirped and bumped her head against the doctor's palm. "Yes, very special indeed." Months passed. Jake's conservation program grew, attracting scientists and volunteers from across human space. They returned to the cub's home planet with proper equipment and a real plan. They studied the remaining population, set up protected areas, and began a breeding program to increase their numbers. The 4 cubs, now adolescents, helped with everything. They taught the scientists how to track and observe their wild cousins without disturbing them. They demonstrated behaviors that helped humans understand the species better, and they never stopped keeping watch, never stopped protecting the humans who had become their pack. One night, Jake stood on a hillside overlooking the protected territory they had established. The cubs sat beside him. Bigger now, but still, his cubs. In the valley below, lights from the research station glowed warm against the darkness. In the forests beyond, wild custodians lived free and safe, their population slowly growing. Luna made a soft sound and leaned against Jake. He scratched behind her ears, smiling. "We did it, girl. We actually did it." The sun began to rise, painting the alien sky in beautiful colors. The cubs watched it come, alert and peaceful. They didn't need to keep watch anymore. They were home, truly home, with their human and their kind. But old habits died hard. As the sun climbed higher, Luna looked back at Jake and chirped once. A question and a promise. "We watch until dawn?" Jake laughed and pulled her close. "Always, Luna. We watch until dawn. Together.